Gray, in some way, reincarnated in another world and managed to become a very strong adventurer. In one of his normal days in this new world, ends up meeting some children who were in the favela and decides to help them because otherwise he would regret it later. But what happens is that in some way he ends up becoming his father, and that is why he has to become stronger to be able to protect his family. Now I bring you this new manga, so I'm sure you'll like it, because it's really good. Help us by subscribing and leaving a like and comment. You don't have a second chance in life, even if it were a life full of regrets, and that's why Gray wanted to live his next life better. He said that this time he wanted to live his life without regrets and was in front of two children. The boy was trying to ask for help, even begging, and Gray just kept looking at that. He was very nervous, and the people around him began to say several things, how to call him a monster for making two kids beg for something. He explains that he was from another world and this game is similar to another game. He remembers this memory in his past life and did not know much about the game. He bought it after seeing his friend play, but he never opened the seal and said that this bright world is from a world about swords and magic, and all he knew was that it was a RPG based on commands. It had many heroines and their choices changed with which one you hunt if the default name of the antagonist is Izuka or something like that. But Gray thought that since he has a very evil appearance, many times they confused him with a bandit or something like that, and he reincarnated as an evil secondary character. His name is Gray and he does not know what his role in the game is definitely, so he decided to be simply an adventurer and live there. He puts his hand on his head and sees those two kids. He says that's the essence of the adventurer. An honor or profession. They reunite in the guild frequently with different ranks. Then the one with and finally the one with the most. Each rank has the least and the most, and he said that this was a nuisance. Adventurers have ranks that advance to A from rank D, then C, B and finally A. There were many other rules, but he did not take them into account and explained that the test for rank B is to complete 3 missions of rank C in a row. There are some predetermined tests to ascend. He also knows how to use a sword and said that in some way he went up to the rank he was good at. Various types of magic, attack, healing, bath, debut. He was an adventurer of rank B who can keep his head up anywhere. At least he would not die, and at that moment he wanted those two to stop doing that in front of everyone and many people around him. They asked if the children were going to be sold. Others even said that they called the guards, and the protagonist was already getting nervous. He begins to think that everyone was judging him just for his lair, without even knowing the book, and he wonders how he got to that point. The girl told Gray that they were begging, and the boy said that he knew that he was very ashamed on his part, but he had to help. He had to heal a member of his family who was very sick and could easily use his magic, until someone passes by and the boy asks him if he could buy a flower, but the guy simply kicks him saying that he did not want those dirty flowers, and there Gray hits that guy with a kick in the face and the guy is lying on the ground saying that he will buy a flower, and Gray begins to think about his recovery magic. He asks if the boys had parents or brothers, but they said no, they did not have a father or any royal family, and one of the friends with whom they lived was also sick, and Gray thought that the recovery magic could only heal wounds and only the priests of the church can use healing magic, and Gray said that everything was fine. They ask him if he was serious, and Gray says that if that was not a problem for him, he just had to take it to the place, but he was not sure that he could cure them, and he began to think that the healing potions he had would really work. The boys said that they had no way to pay, and so he said that everything was fine, that when they managed to pay for something they will simply find him. They started to cry a lot, but Gray really did not understand why they were crying. The kids said it was because someone was finally nice to them, and the girl because they could not do anything. All those who live with them are just children, and they ask them to calm down. You don't even start to think that at that moment he feels that he had to cure them regardless of what happens next. They begin to walk towards the direction of the house, and the boy says that they have not yet introduced themselves, and he says that his name is Gray, and he says that how can they not see that he is an adventurer. The boy said that he was Asuka and she was Hilo, and he said that it was a great pleasure to meet the protagonist, and he was already starting to think about that name. Asuka was said that he was the antagonist of that world, and that was not a coincidence, and Gray begins to think that in the case of reincarnating as a villain he would get killed, but since he doesn't know anything, he wonders that he would do it according to the guide of his consciousness, perhaps at random, but he said that even if he gets involved with the villain, he leads to his death. That was not a reason to help them. He did not want to go ahead and die. He just wanted to live and not regret anything. The boy said they arrived and he was going to go in and explain things to them first. And then he and the girl stay outside and Gray begins to look around him. He said it was literally a periphery, looked at the girl and asked her what had happened and began to think that she was not supposed to be there. She could also have entered. She leans and begins to thank him. She said SHR was really grateful, but he said to be thankful after she could help her family and said he could be a bad guy that could potentially kidnap all her family. But she said she still heard what he had to say. Additionally, he also said that Gray, she really was not a bad person and they knew it. He thought she was really naive. There is no basis to trust Gray even more with that appearance of his, but he was very happy that she had trusted him. The girl asks if she had bothered Gray, but Gray said he was not angry. No, he is just like that and was thinking about other things, and the girl is relieved. Gray begins to think, wow, that hurt, huh? It seems that I am upset like that, just because I have a serious face. And the protagonist says he has heard that a lot since he became Gray. He was aware of that. It's the kind of face he has. The boy ends up returning and thanks him for waiting. He says he could go in to see everyone there. Immediately he sees 3 more children and a woman. He said this was the member of the sick family. The girl asked if she could cure her and the boy said he would try with what he had. The woman apologized for not introducing herself. She said her name was Arl, and the one in her lap was Nina, and the one on the other side was Lutz. And the one who was sleeping was Estella, and it was to help her because she was very sick. Gray is surprised. He wanted to ask a question and say that it was very strange, but he asks what color are the eyes of that girl. Arl said that the color was red, she had canine teeth and was pale. She said that that star girl was a vampire and was probably a mestiza, she said, which probably discriminated her both among humans and among vampires, since vampires are pure blood and she was halfway. And he begins to think that Izuka and the others do not know that she is probably a vampire. After all, if they knew, they would not ask a stranger for help. The boy asks if Estella would be okay. But Gray said he was not sick, she was just malnourished. And there is a strange pressure in the room. The protagonist begins to think that when vampires do not get enough nutrients, they feel thirsty for blood. But it was strange that he had not attacked any other child. And he said that she did not realize his thirst for blood and asks what he was doing like this. He said this was a simple problem for him. He just needs to get the nutrients she needs and the protagonist gets up and asks what they used to eat. The kid open up his hand and says it was church food, they will sometimes eat bread. But the protagonist apologizes and tells him to forget it. He begins to think that church food is once a week and is probably the best food that those children can eat. He said everything was fine. He said that by that time he would be providing them with food for a month and they were not even believing. The boy asks if he was sure, while the girl says that they could not accept all this. But he asks if they wanted help or not. He said that his magic would not heal Stella and there was another solution for malnutrition, which was simply to eat and have a balanced diet every day. They were very grateful to Gray. And Gray begins to say that he was going to the market and begins to think that if he abandoned those children, he would certainly regret it. And he said with an evil smile that they were lucky and when they trusted him, they would be sacrificed for their self-satisfaction. And he begins to think that something heavy suddenly did not look good in his stomach. So for that day he would add some fruits and bread until suddenly several people appear. An unknown man dressed in black with a shaved head approaches Gray asking if he was also watching those children in the cabin. But Gray gets angry about this and already grabs the guy's doll. He told him not to put those dirty hands on him and begins to squeeze. After that, he grabs him by the head and throws him to the ground. The boys are even afraid of Gray and he begins to say that he did not know what they were planning to do with those little ones, but he would make sure that it would never happen. After a few moments, they were all lying on the ground, all injured, and Gray begins to warn one of them that if they put their hands on those children, Gray will make food with them. He even says to chew slowly, attack the fingers and feet so they don't die too fast, would say very, very slowly. And they are already scared. He begins to think that he managed to scare them for a while and even said that they were very noisy. He has the boy's head on the ground and says that it is good that he could ask. He asks him how he had found it. The boy said that he thought Gray was like them and was after his goals. And Gray asks if he did not learn at school not to judge a book by its cover and then leaves after hitting that boy. He begins to think that that world does not have schools and later he was already in the city. He said that that was the city he lives in. There is a big building for the guild and a lot of missions are given there. In addition to the fact that the rewards correspond to their difficulty and it is an easy city to live for adventurers, professionals like him because this city is right on the route that goes to the capital and to other countries. In addition, the place has a large population scale and due to the large population, obviously there are many bandits around, like those guys from before, they consider themselves part of the underground guild. After that, He buys bread and says that since he does not have a team, he would receive all the reward and could calmly buy the children's food. After a while, he arrives there and says that it is time to cook and the boys are already excited. Silver comments that he knew that he did not look like someone who knew how to cook. And the boy is already scared, saying that he did not mean that. The woman told the children to allow her to help him light the fire, and Gray sees that there is a boy who wanted that apple. Gray holds his head and says to wait a few. And that girl tells Nina and Lutz to wait and go with her to the corner. The protagonist begins to think that everyone were behaving well. It was not what one would expect from a favela. And he would not investigate so much either. He begins to think that those children can make easy recipes until that girl starts taking off her clothes. He looks at her and tells her to stay still and clean her nose. But then that girl ends up calling him dad and is even surprised by this. He knew she was wrong, but she would have been sad if he doesn't acknowledge it. Until the woman calls Nina saying not to bother Gray, and Gray did not know what to do. After a while, they were at the table, and the woman said that everyone was ready and could eat their food. Gray began to think that he ended up eating with them. The boy said that the food was very good, while the other girl fought with him so that he would not eat with her mouth full, while the two children got dirty with the food. Nina looks at Gray and thanks him for calling her dad. Gray says he should clean, and Lutz also takes his plate. He even looks at him a little, and then the woman raises Estella to eat and asks him if he could. He told her to eat slowly. They had a little more strength and to tell him that he was managing to regain his energy. Ariel tells Gray to leave the cleaning in his hands. He did not have to worry about that. And he says that everything was fine. The boy begins to thank Gray for the food, and the girl also says that it was very good. Gray said it was nothing and began to think that time would solve it. Then, Silver says he was going home, but Nina really didn't want to. He ends up hugging him and holding his doll. He hands the doll to Gray and he wonders what a doll is for. Mel apologizes to Gray and tries to explain to Nina that Gray was going home, but Nina says that the Pope's house is there. Gray says it's okay. Children are like that, and it was time to sleep, so he would stay until then. He begins to think that he just wanted to do what he would not regret later. He ends up remembering his past life, his sister saying goodbye to his mother and his mother telling him to make sure he was okay while he was out, and his father also saying that he was in high school. He said the last words he heard were "see you later." The scene cuts the next morning. The protagonist was carrying several foods and said that taking freshness into account, this should be more or less good. He thought he would stay with an easy meal for a while, and when the time came he would do it with quality meat. After that, he arrives at the place and puts all the food there. They are really impressed and say that the recipes and ideas for the menu were for them to look at. They end up looking, and the protagonist says that he would not go there every day, so they could eat well outdoors. Mel asks if he would like to take a look. The others were also still sleeping there, and he begins to think that it is as if he were already a father about to go on a business trip. And he sees the three of them there. They were sleeping while Ari asked Mel if he had slept well the night before. He said that with Nina's tantrum and everything else he could have bothered him, but he said it was not a problem, so she did not need to worry about that. Apparently, Mel was quite happy, and the boy said that Gray and he would meet again. Then, the boy said that it was clear that he had a plan and that it was time to make money. The scene cuts a little later, where there is an old monster or man running and says that he cannot win and that he knows that, so he has to flee. He is desperate, saying that that man is not human and that humans are only cattle that step as they want. But all his subordinates died in front of that human and their heads flew away easily. He says that that guy is not human until Gray appears with his devil smile and starts attacking. He ends up killing the orc without any hesitation. And Gray says that there is something he wants to buy, so he will have to get the balls and the head of the orc. The scene cuts to the Adventurers Guild, the mission board, and the protagonist was watching several missions. He says in his thoughts that a mission to exterminate an old orc seems like a good choice and that he will go for it. He begins to think if it is true, and the protagonist was listening to the staff nodding if he was that guy with the humorous man. The extras say that he committed all the crimes you can imagine, assaults, blackmail, robberies, and everything else. He begins to think that if that were true, they would have revoked the adventurer's license a long time ago. Until someone speaks. If it's not Gray, right? A boy says that an extermination mission is quite surprising for Gray and asks what he wanted to buy. Gray realizes that it is a guy named Diz and asks him if he could not bother him so early because he was annoying. He also says that he was very cold. The name of that boy was Diz Vladix and team leader. He even comments that his heart hurts and asks how Gray could be of the same rank as him. He heard that the protagonist was treating some bastards inside the favelas and asks what Gray's plan is. Gray begins to think that every time that guy appears it is only because he rejected the invitation to join his team. Diz says that Gray is full of himself after reaching rank B, even though it was TRS years after him, and asks if the protagonist was not satisfied with him. The protagonist tells him that it is really good to remember his roots and tells him that the extermination of a goblin was just there for him to take it, but he gets nervous because a goblin is of low rank. The protagonist continues to say that he knew he was very happy when he reached the rank, but just like him at that moment. Then, Diz gets angry and begins to try to go after Gray, saying that he is screwed, while his subordinates yell at the leader that he cannot fight there. Gray simply ignores him and begins to think that if he had taken out his gun, he would have been justified in his own defense. Until Gray calls a dispatcher named Sasa and says that he was taking that mission. She tells him to at least wait until after registration to deal with that, but he says that he was the one who started this. She begins to say that they were just children and begin to review the mission. An old orc was seen in the nearby forest for the safety of the people. Please, kill him. That mission did not pay more than a normal orc despite the fact that the difficulty of the mission was greater, of course. It was obvious that it was from a town. The assistant says that they were too poor to pay the bills and that is why the mission was cheap. Also, it was uncommon to see a reward not proportional to the mission difficult, but it was because the people there were poor, and she asked if he did not want a temporary team. Gray said that even if he wanted, there was no team to let him in, so he did not need one. He begins to think that he needs to finish as quickly as possible and then manage to get food for the others. It would take at least a day to get to that town by carriage. The girl calls Gray's name and Gray asks what happened. She begins to think that no one from the guild believed those rumors about him and was praying for his return. Preta says yes and begins to say that it is not as if he were a philanthropist. He had the opportunity to obtain benefits beyond the rewards and says that they are components for a powerful aphrodisiac. He could sell those balls for a high price since the nobles always asked for it. She told the orc to enjoy himself and that the symbol of masculinity would serve to make noble heirs. The girl wondered what she was thinking and the scene cuts to the customer's town. A man was very grateful to help him accepting that mission, even if he paid little. This was the head of the town. He told Marina to also make a reverence and thank him. He said he would go straight to exterminate that orc and would simply guide him. The old man is even surprised to ask if he would do it at that time. He says he can rest a little and then they will prepare a room for him. He says that if he insists, he could be fine. That was the girl from the village, Marina. She begins to think that she was very scared. She was very afraid of Gray and the old man tells Marina that she was the most beautiful young woman in the village and asks her if she could accompany the adventurer for one night and that if she had a son, everyone in the village would help her raise him. She begins to think that there was no way she could reject the people of that village that raised her after she lost her parents. After that, she goes to Gray's room and he is in front of her. She is trembling with fear and he asks her if her name is Marina, to which she replies yes. She said she would take care of him, but he realized that she was scared to death and Gray simply puts his hand on her forehead, saying that this was his way of making up for the low reward. And he said the truth was that there were a lot of stupid and barbaric adventurers. Not all took decisions like he was taking. He said she didn't need to be there, but she didn't understand very well and Gray repeats saying that it was not necessary. He would leave early in the morning, anyway, he wouldn't sleep and she could inform the residents after he leaves.